Dear friends, welcome to the Mindful Maya podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to understanding the phenomenon of the mind and be free from its conditions. The series features various talk shows given by the mystic Maya around the world in what he calls the conversation from the silence to the silence.
Usually the mind is filled with lots of different thoughts, and some thoughts are ideas, some thoughts are memories, some thoughts are desires, and actually some thoughts are in the state of the body, very closely associated with the body, that the body itself starts to respond onto these thoughts. And there's only degree of how much thought there are in the mind to how less thoughts there are in the mind. On any day where we feel anxious is when there are a lot of thought, and when we are on a day with a peaceful state of mind, there are relatively less thoughts. But the mind as such is a collection of thoughts, be it more flowing rapidly or less, appearing one or two here and there thoughts. And there is a natural way to calm down the mind and reduce the thoughts, and there is a natural way, or the external influence way, to achieve the same. And the unnatural way looks more easier since we use external substances which does the work for us of calming down the mind. And it can be alcohol, it can be stimulating drugs, it can be any substances coming from outside that does something to the state of our mind. And using external substances feels easy because just drink a cup of wine or 2 cups, or drink some alcohol or take some pills, and after some time the mind is calm. But although it works by using external substances, the downside of it is we don't have control, we don't have our conscious control over the thoughts, over the whole process of how mind quiets down, because something else is doing the function of quieting down our mind. And in many cases, the external substances slows down the processes in the brain to make the mind appear quiet. And usually psychedelic substances, they pass through these states of rapid running of thoughts in the mind and finally dissociating the mind with the experiencer to make the experiencer feel that mind has become quiet. And as soon as the effects of the substances slow down, the moment the mind was quiet and would have otherwise had a lot of thoughts, this coming off from an effect of any substance brings in a flood of all these thoughts that should have been there. In other words, the experience of using substances may feel amazing, but later on all these unaddressed thoughts will come back. And some of these substances, if a person is used to with these substances, then the brain wants it more, the mind wants it more. So it becomes dependent to the substances to have a quiet state of mind, or rather forgetting the flood of thoughts that's there what we call mind, is basically a flood of thoughts, or river of thoughts, or a stream of thoughts, or waves of thoughts. So it is okay once or twice to see how these external substances influences the mind and understand how it can help mind to quiet down. But at some point it becomes evident that the experiencer, having been used the substances, starts to understand that without these substances it is not so easy to do the same, to reach the same state. Now, according to Tantra, it is okay, it is alright whatever you want to do with your life. It does not question you. This is where free will comes in, that even though if the mind is heavily conditioned towards certain ideas, towards certain practice, the existence is not going to question you. It is still giving you free will within the heavily hypnotized mind to do whatever the mind desires to do, whatever an individual desires to do. So they are free in this term. But occasionally there are some people who see that this effect of induced silence is only there when induced by the external substance. And for these few people, it does not feel right. It does not feel self-ethical that I am using an external substance to quiet myself down. And these type of individuals are the ones who are generally understood as seekers. And these seekers want to experience the inner reality without the influence of external substances. Or in other words, there is a way to attain the same silent state of mind without the external induced state, or without the external influence. And to make it happen naturally is something the mind finds utterly boring, because all we have to do is nothing to have the same state reached. In other way, this great patience to sit somewhere and be in a state of non-action as much as possible, whereas by the introduction of external substances, a human body, a mind can keep on doing something until it reaches to the point of quiet mind. So people who take these substances, they dance, they do something, some artwork, they do yoga, they go on hiking, there's some activity involved. And suddenly it reaches to the quiet mind, and many of the people may sit in and watch this quiet state, while some of them may feel this quiet state fearful in a way, and they'd like to keep on indulging into activities even more. So there are different effects of using substances in this way. And the way of non-invasive approach, or without using any substances, is to induce the state or effect of those substances in the brain, in the mind, without external influence, and make it happen naturally. And this is possible because there are receptors in the brain which can activate itself by certain practices. And this activation of these effects may be very, very subtle and very nuanced in comparison to the usage of external substances. But this very nuanced and subtle experiences goes on increasing. Or let's say, if you enter into this state of seeing these subtle experiences, it is as if you are taking in a microscope and enlarging the experience and seeing a very tiny moment of time and expanding it and experiencing all the little details that's in there. And this happens with all the conscious will and conscious control of the experiencer. So the only barrier that it seems is there is the boredom. Because to observe something that subtle, that small, and have a patience to keep on watching it, it may take some time for some people even to understand these different patterns. Because pattern is something that we understand is a pattern by seeing it again and again and again. So we may have to sit in silence for an hour at one sitting and see different experiences that happens. Then again, in another sitting, in another day, another time or place, we sit again and watch and see that a lot of the experience is similar. And all those similar experiences are the ones forming patterns. And sitting without doing anything, just watching, just being there and seeing whatever the mind presents can become a tedious task, because the body may start to feel uneasy. The mind may say, oh, I need to move. Or the mind may even question, what is this? What am I doing here? What is this? I could have done something, I could have accomplished something. There's a lot of things to do and I'm sitting here like this. So many things may show up. This is where patience is immensely needed, that we sit and just accept whatever the mind brings and accept it in its totality and keep on watching. And this keeping on watching is what shows us all these different patterns that we have. These same patterns on a very, very deep meditation appears as symbolic patterns in a visual state, or different visualizations, or different sonic patterns in terms of sound. Not only that, but in the deep state of meditations, all the senses are active in a different way. For example, when we open our eyes and see the world, we see the patterns externally. And in deep meditation states, we start to see the patterns, visual patterns. And that is just like the observing outside has turned inwards and we're observing inside. It's not the eyes, the physical eyes that we use to see, but it is its corresponding mechanism of observing that we have beyond our eyes, which is active. And the same happens with ears. Whereas in normal day we would listen to the sound from outside, while we are in meditation, the mechanism of hearing starts to hear sounds from inside. And there are different patterns as well. And there are patterns of smell, there are patterns of taste and touch. So this mechanism of listening outside or perceiving outside through these five senses from the body is also capable of perceiving inside equally, but this time without using these five senses of the body, but only using the mechanism as such of perceiving. And yet we need a great patience. And sometimes when we sit for meditation, we may experience something extraordinary, and sometimes we may not even experience anything new. It may be just sitting there and nothing happens. When we sit to have something happen to us and nothing happens, we have to understand that if nothing happened, that is also something. There is a process, this happening of nothing, or when we say nothing happened, there was something going on inside. The expectation for something familiar that happened in previous meditations, or the expectation of experiencing something new. Merely this expectation was present, which overshadowed all the experiences that could have happened. And this is also true that the expectation happened. It is not that nothing happened, but expectation happened. And this is very, very nuanced experience, a very subtle experience that we didn't perceive the expecting state of the mind as something. If we look at our surrounding, the trees, they don't expect. The wind, it doesn't expect. There are many animals who don't expect. So the expectation of something is already a huge phenomenon. So when we say nothing happened, there is definitely something going on inside which we were unaware of. So let's say we perceived a sitting of meditation as nothing happened. Then what we should do is, we should acknowledge that all right, today nothing happened. Sometimes we see something, sometimes nothing happens. And again, this is where a great patience becomes relevant. When we sit in meditation again, there may be very subtle movements that we may miss, we may not miss. And the idea should be that it is okay, whatever happens, I am all right with it. If something happens, okay. If something does not happen, if nothing happens, it's okay. When we have this approach towards ourselves, this is a non-invasive approach. When we expect something to happen and we sit for meditation, this is an invasive approach. And with an invasive approach, we may see something, we may not see something. It is just like turning a dice. But with non-invasive approach, that we feel okay if something is going to happen or if nothing is going to happen. With this non-invasive approach, there is always a lot of learnings, a lot of things that we can learn as we sit in silence and watch. And let's say, the most powerful accomplishment that can happen is the accomplishment over the boredom, because the mind will definitely be bored. So if we let the mind become bored, and if we are okay with it, and we're just observing even in this boredom, this is the threshold that separates the experience from mental association with the world and the self to the non-existing minds, or let's say mind's non-existent association with the reality. And all it takes is a great patience, which can go on developing with each sitting of meditation. And the more this patience develops, the more it reflects in our personal lives, in association with other people and their life, and our physical earthly experience. And sooner or later we start to experience this state of mind where there is no thoughts, yet we can by will induce thoughts. We can think about anything, we can think about ideas or our actions or what we need to do tomorrow. We can think, we can use the mind, but otherwise it remains silent. And this state of silence, many people have experienced as soon as they are awakened in the morning, naturally awakened, without alarm or without anybody waking them up, simply when the body and mind is ready to wake up. First, we are aware of the body and aware of the place we're sleeping in. Before opening our eyes, just this state of waking up. And it is in that state where there are no thoughts, but soon the mind starts to have thoughts about what we need to do today or where we need to go. Everything, all the thoughts starts to come back. But the moment we are awakened, there are no thoughts. The same happens when we awaken in the middle of the night, finding our eyes open, just our eyes open, and then we calmly go back to sleep. In that state also there are no thoughts, and after having taken a short nap, and immediately after waking up, there's no thoughts. Yet we bring the thoughts by our own will. In this case, we are using the mind to bring in thoughts. And after a meditation session, also, we find ourselves in the similar state where there are no thoughts. As the stream of thought goes on increasing more, or the flow of thoughts are increasing more, then the experience is of unrestfulness. There is no rest, to the point it may start feeling anxious. We may start feeling anxious. We want to do something to make this flow of thought stop or slow down. And there are states where there is occasional thoughts, and there are states where there is no thoughts. One common experience I've seen in our meditation sessions and that people have shared during the session is whenever the mind is silent for a longer period, somehow the mind is scared. There is a feeling of fear inside that something has gone wrong, because usually the mind keeps on bringing more series of thoughts. But when there is no thoughts, the first few seconds may seem all right, because we are habituated with that. But as this state of silence increases and there is no activity in the mind for quite some time, then we become afraid of this state. Of course, we can bring in the thought. Immediately when we are afraid, we bring in the thoughts. The mere feeling of fear, just the thought, just the experience of fear brings in the thought immediately to make us feel safe, to make us feel in comfort. Because mind also is a very intelligent mechanism, or let's say the body and mind, this combination that we inhabit is a very complex intelligent mechanism that is made up of compassion, made up of love to take care of us. So whenever we feel fear in this sense, the feeling of fear and flowing of thought at the same time occurs. They happen at the same time, and we go back to the state of movement of thought and we feel fine. And all the other issue that our human mind has, our social mind has, our individual life has, with different stories that we live, is associated with the flow of thoughts in the mind, or what kind of flow of thoughts we have, or what kinds of thoughts are flowing inside, and the type of emotional degree of let's say emotional attachment of the thoughts, what kind of emotion a certain thought has with it. The more power that thought has, the more that thought repeats in the mind, the more that type of emotional experience we will have. So whenever we have certain emotional experience, it does not only feel in the mind, but it also starts to feel in the body, that we have certain parts in the body that react to certain emotional experience. And think about it, when the mind is silent, there is no emotional thought, there is no feeling of negative experiences or positive experiences in the body. The body simply is calm, the mind simply is calm. When we have a positive experience, thoughts going on in the mind, we have positive feelings in the body, and so is the experience. And it is similar towards the negative flow of thoughts associated, or it associates itself with the negative feeling of emotions that affects us. So our experience is dependent on what kind of flow of thoughts we are having at this moment in time, in the present moment. And with deeper meditation, it is possible to see that not only the thoughts trigger emotion, but the emotions trigger thought as well. So both of them somehow go side by side together. And therefore, if we are able to meditate and see the flow of thoughts, gradually a dissociation with the flow of thoughts happens, that we see the flow of thought is there, and we also see that we are observing this flow as it happens. And this dissociation separates us from the thought and the experience and makes us an observer of what is happening inside, in the emotions, in the thoughts, in the body, in the mind. And this dissociation is neither negative nor positive. This simply brings us between, or at the center of the duality, where on the one hand there is all negative side, and on the other hand there is all the positive side of experience or thoughts, yet we find ourselves at the center. This center is where the peace is, and this center is what every human can reach and accomplish a sense of personal, individual inner peace. When there is no thoughts in the mind, when the mind is silent, when it is beyond mind, it may appear that isn't it a mindless thing, or isn't it going crazy? And while it appears to the mind that to not have a state of mind to think about something and think that something as positive or negative, it may be absurd. And it is normal for the mind to think so, because mind can only think in terms of positivity and negativity, or in terms of duality. But the observer can see beyond duality, or can see the presence of both from the center. So it is important for an individual to enter to this state at the center of the duality, to start seeing the reality as it is. And from this vantage point, that individual's life will start to change, rather in a much positive way, or rather in a more relaxed way. And this is the path of a yogi, or a sage, or an internal philosopher, or a Buddha, whoever wants to find out who that person is. And it all starts with simple witnessing of the mind as we consciously become silent by our own choice, and most importantly, without the use of substances. The Tantra, the existence, is not against using any kind of substances, but it tells the user all the time that the effect that they are experiencing is by the use of substances. So there is always this awareness that this is not me, this is the substances doing this. But it is not said that it is negative. Rather, it is said that if you want to approach through the substances way, go and approach with the substances way, so that you can see sooner or later that the substances are inducing these states, and these states can be induced naturally with meditation. And it is better to go through this experience and to realize that it is still the external experience by using substances than to never walk in the path of finding who we are at all. That's why Tantra never says anything as negative or positive, because as we indulge into anything, we find out ourselves what is good for us individually, what is not. And once you find that this path is of depending on the substance, gradually this knowledge will bring you in or pull you and your mind towards the path of making all these experiences occur naturally. Because there is always this inner pull naturally with every one of us that keeps us pulling inside to know who we are. And that's all for today. Let's meditate.
Dear friends, we want to publish these life-changing conversations as a book, and for that, we need your help. Please leave your thoughts on our Facebook page, Maya Satsang, and also share this podcast with your friends. Every thought is valuable, and every share counts.